Hello and welcome to The Open Road. I'm your host, Alex LaFries. Make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube and find us on Facebook and Twitter under Open Road Channel. This week I'm reviewing the 2014 Mazda CX-5 Grand Touring. There are a lot of things to like about this car and one big, or should I say small thing, not to. Let's hit the open road. So, the 2014 Mazda CX-5. This is the all-wheel drive version. It also comes in a front-wheel drive version. I drove the 2013 CX-5, almost an identical car to this one, except for one big difference, and that is the engine. This has a 2.5-liter four-cylinder, putting out 185 horsepower and 184 foot-pounds of torque versus the 150 horsepower output of the old engine, and it is amazing what a difference 34 horsepower makes. The old car was clearly underpowered. It was the real weak link in that car. This one is just fine. I wouldn't mind, of course, having another 20 or 30 horsepower, and because it's a four-cylinder, it does tend to drone a little bit, although it doesn't have a CVT, so it's not as bad as it could be. And the rest of the car drives really, really well. Mazda does a great job with their SUVs. This being the CX-5, they've got the CX-7, the CX-9, and all of them drive smaller than they should. They put a little firmer suspension on it. The steering is electronically controlled, and they've put a nice little weight to it. The suspension is a little stiffer, which does give you a slightly more jarring ride, but it all adds to that sportiness that Mazda has really gone for. Their tagline the last number of years has been zoom zoom, and it sounds corny, but it really is sort of the case. I would say from a sporting aspect, their SUVs actually tend to do a little better job relatively than their cars do. So not a lot to complain about behind the wheel. The interior, again, Mazda has done a very, very nice job. The instrument panel is very well done. So many car makers can't seem to figure out where to put their information screen into the dash. Mazda has done a really good job. It's in the panel on the right. It's got all of the information that you would need. You can easily scroll through it with controls on the steering wheel, and the whole thing is basically black, white, and gray. So they didn't add a bunch of colors in there. It's clean, it's simple, and that design kind of flows through to the rest of the cabin. A lot of grays, blacks, and whites. Really, really nice. They've still got real buttons, tactile buttons for heating, AC. It's got a touch screen for the navigation and entertainment system, but you also have manual buttons should you choose to use them. The screen is too small. I don't know why Mazda made the screen quite that small. It is clearly too small and looks slightly out of place, but that's one of the very few things on this car, especially when it comes to the interior, to complain about. Because it's the Grand Touring, it comes with all sorts of bells and whistles, including heated seats, obviously the navigation, a premium Bose stereo system, bigger wheels, fog lights, the sunroof, leather with red contrast stitching in the seats, which is actually really cool looking, and they've done a good job with. So there's not a lot of features that I can think of that I really would want in this car that it doesn't have. It's got a lot of safety features, obviously a bunch of airbags. It's got a lane departure warning system, which is good. It's not too intrusive. It lets you know, but it doesn't punch you in the face to tell you that there's a car in your blind spot. And speaking of visibility, it's good most places. The rear window is a little narrow, so it can be slightly hard to see out of, but for the most part, visibility is good. It's got two cup holders right here and a nice center console with USB inputs. or for hauling all of your stuff. So Mazda has really done a good job with the interior. It hasn't changed from last year, but then again, it didn't really need to. Rear legroom in the CX-5 is pretty good. The biggest problem is when you go to fold the seats down, the driver and passenger side seats have to be slid way up in order for the seats to go flush. Otherwise, they'll end up at sort of a 45-degree angle. But there is room for 3 back there, and the center little armrest does fold down there for a little added comfort. Overall, pretty comparable with everything else in the class. And so finally, we arrive at the back of the CX-5. And unfortunately, this is where this car really falls short. As you can see, there's just not that much room. You can fold the rear seats down and get more space, but then you find yourself in a 2-seater. Much of that has to do with this sloping rear line that, while great looking, takes away tons of functional space. I had to do some serious shoving just to get 3 sets of golf clubs back here. Now, to be fair, it's not really the CX-5's fault, but rather an inherent shortcoming of almost all crossovers. I've never really been a fan of them because they claim to do everything pretty well, but in reality, you're making a lot of sacrifices. To illustrate my point, let's compare the CX-5 to the new Mazda 6. The Mazda 6 is cheaper, more fun to drive, gets better fuel economy, has plenty of rear leg room, and a trunk with ample space and seats that fold down. Now, of course, cargo space isn't quite as big, and it doesn't have all-wheel drive if you live where it snows, but you really have to ask yourself if the advantages of a crossover are really worth the trade-offs. All that being said, though, this really is a great car, and if you decide that a crossover really does deserve a spot in your garage, the CX-5 is awfully hard to beat. I'm your host, Alex LaFreese. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time on the open road.